The face of Newcastle's CBD and suburbs has constantly changed since 1961. That's when the last Mine Subsidence Board's district boundaries were drawn up as part of its role to protect property owners from old underground workings. To keep up with the times, those boundaries have been redrawn. In a visit to Newcastle late this afternoon, the Minister for Natural Resources, Ian Causley, announced that under the changes, some suburbs have now been included in the district, while others have been taken out. Included are Tighes Hill, Hamilton East and South, Newcastle West, Carrington and parts of Mayfield, Mayfield East, Newcastle, The Junction and Merriweather. The suburbs taken out are parts of Adamstown, Jesmond, Katara, Lambton, New Lambton and North Lambton. But the Minister says exclusion from the district doesn't affect compensation cases should they arise in those old mining suburbs.
It doesn't mean that they can't claim for mine subsidence, but it does mean they won't be constrained by the conditions that are laid down by the Mine Subsidence Board, so it could in many cases mean they can build cheaper dwellings.
Despite the tougher building guidelines imposed by the board on new constructions in its district, Mr Causley believes that won't dampen development in the CBD, especially the Honeysuckle project.
The Mine Subsidence Board have been working very closely with the City Council and also with the construction company involved in the Honeysuckle development. So I think that any of that would have been discussed at that particular time and people would be aware of it.
Coincidentally, the Minister's announcement comes only days after 80 homes were damaged, apparently by mine subsidence at Gwandolin.
Yeah, that's Murphy's Law, I think it's called, but from the information that I've been given anyway, that any constructions, any buildings that were constructed under the mine subsidence guidelines suffered very little damage.
The Ambulance Service Staffing Report analysed operations in the Hunter over 12 months to the end of 1991. Its conclusion that a review of staffing, workload and demography of the region clearly indicated gross shortcomings and problems. The news doesn't come as a surprise to union officials.
For years now, the Ambulance Officers Union has said that we have a major problem with staffing, we have a major problem with ambulance coverage, and this report has borne out exactly what the ambulance officers have been saying.
The report claims that the existing 260 Hunter Ambulance Service staff would have to be increased by a minimum of 45 officers to even begin to correct the problem. It points out that in some smaller stations, populations have totally outstripped the ambulance service. The report highlighted Port Stephens, where the ambulance service may well be totally inadequate. The relative isolation of the area, combined with high levels of recreational activity on the waterways, reaches a crisis point in the tourist season when the ratio of ambulance officers to the public is 1 to 11,000. Members of the Ambulance Union say the report simply confirms what they've been saying for years, but now that the report has been tabled, they expect the government to take prompt action.
I would like to see some sort of answer from the Treasury and the relevant minister on those two areas by sometime next week.
Tom Hilston, NBN News.
The open cut operations at United Collieries were in full swing today, even though both management and the workforce expected the mining in this stage to be phased out more than 18 months ago. But the borrowed time is up for the open cut mine. It's closing at the end of next month.
We've basically run out of open cut reserves and we're now focusing on exploiting our underground reserves.
United's $32 million underground development was launched in January and is expected to yield 500,000 tonnes of coal a year. But the open-cut miners won't be part of the new work. The 23 workers in this open-cut mine are from a contractor, Hunter Valley Earth Moving Company. The manager of that contracting company, David Foster, says while most of his men will be placed in other mining operations, some are facing retrenchment.
The worst case scenario would be possibly half a dozen people who lose their positions.
Only a few kilometres away from United Collieries are the Leamington Coal Mine's underground operations, due to close in July at the cost of 206 jobs.
There's not much going around in the underground industry. I'd say a lot of them would be looking at the dole.
The Mine Workers Federation says the announced closure at Leamington indicates the tough times for the Hunters underground operations.
We've only got probably about half a dozen mines up around here. All of them are really struggling, I suppose, at this point of time.
It's a signal for the rest of the industry that we have to remain cost competitive to remain viable and efficient producers of coal.
Scott Bevan, NBN News.
It rolled down a hill after being hit by lightning and losing its electrical power. All the passengers got out beforehand, but dozens waiting at a crowded tram stop had no chance of escape. Other victims were sitting in cars caught in a traffic jam. Iraq has been doing some fast talking in the United Nations as it comes under increasing pressure to destroy its most deadly weapons. But the Security Council has warned Iraq that the time for talking is running out, and if it doesn't dismantle its missiles and its nuclear program, the UN will order another military strike. American President George Bush says he too is losing patience and will back whatever action the UN decides to take.
After an inconsistent performance in their trial against Illawarra last week, the Falcons will be looking for a full 48-minute effort from the starting five and the bench in the first round of the Kmart Classic in Adelaide. The Falcons need to finish on top of their pool, which includes the Adelaide 36ers, the Canberra Cannons and the South Eastern Basketball League champions Knox, to advance to the second round at Homebush in Sydney next weekend. Coach Weisman says the three matches in the one weekend will be beneficial for the Falcons as they head towards their first NBL match on April the 3rd against the Gold Coast. 10 times Australian sprint car champion Gary Rush will make a quick trip from Adelaide to compete in the Winfield Sprint Car Grand Prix at the Motordrome tomorrow night. Already considered a living legend on speedways throughout the nation, Rush drove himself into history when he won the Australian title for the 10th time at Parramatta last month. Many of the country's top sprint car combinations will be out to knock Rush off his pedestal this Saturday night. And also tomorrow night, the Trackmasters Speedway Cycle Classic, washed out in February, will be run at the Newcastle Showgrounds with solos, sidecars and motocross races to be decided. Multi-Australian title holder Chris Watson will head the cast of thousands in the motorcycle extravaganza. And the first day of the Newcastle District Cricket semi-finals gets underway tomorrow, with minor premiers Charlestown doing battle with Cardiff, while Belmont and Newcastle City meet at Uni number 1.
A pre-carnival luncheon today for Newcastle's racing fraternity. In the crowd, some familiar faces, including former boxing champ Joe Bugner. They have plenty to celebrate. Tomorrow's classic is shaping up to be pure class.
This is one of the best Coca-Cola bottless classic fields we've ever seen at Newcastle.
Newcastle Jockey Club Secretary John Curtis agrees. Last year, Shane Dye rode Torres to victory. Dye's back, along with other top jockeys Mick Dittman, Jim Cassidy, Larry Olsen and Darren Beedman. The crack Sydney horse Burst is at 5-2. Gary Harley's tip for the classic, South Australian filly Zodiac Miss. That's race 6, number 15.
Mick Dittman, the rider, probably the best rider in Australia. Barrier 2, she'll have the run of the race.
For many Christians, the church provides sanctuary from a host of worldly concerns that confront them daily. But a report on the ABC program Compass has suggested that Australian worshippers, especially women, may be the victims of sexual abuse at the hands of a few clergy.
We have heard of women who have been on church rosters, who've gone to church venues to undertake certain responsibilities, who've been sexually assaulted.
According to Uniting Church minister and councillor Peter Oliver, the sexual abuse of parishioners is also happening in the Hunter.
I've spoken to women who've been abused. The authority of the minister has been abusive in the sense of having a relationship with them when they're in a vulnerable, hurting sort of position.
The report claimed 15% of Australian clergy have committed sexual offences against parishioners, a figure that Reverend Oliver believes is exaggerated. There are about 250 clergy people in the Hunters churches. Reverend Oliver believes that little more than a handful of those are involved in the sexual abuse of parishioners.
I think you'd be looking at a percentage much more closer to only 3 or 4%.
Reverend Oliver says the problem crosses all denominational boundaries and has been covered up in the past by some church members.
There would be people who have encouraged women to not say anything. There's been inadequate counselling. There's been that discouragement from seeking legal action.
But he's confident that the presence of women among the clergy and more support and counselling for the ministers themselves will help alleviate a problem considered most unholy. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
The Master Builders Association says business is tough, yet workers' conditions are the opposite. Executive Director of the Newcastle office, Norm Steep, says employers are paying $150 a week to workers before they even lift a hammer, with superannuation costs, redundancy payments, fares to work and site allowances.
If we can get some costs considerations out, well, maybe we can get some of those guys out there back into work.
Norm Steep says building workers get paid for 24 extra days each year, 13 of which are rostered days off. Days he says cannot be changed to suit the program of the employer.
If you've got a concrete pour that's been postponed for several days and the rostered day comes up, fine, you can't pour because it's a rostered day off.
The union says the master builders have got their facts wrong. The award does leave room for flexibility.
If it's the wish of the members on a particular site, by agreement with the employer to move the day for whatever reason may be valid, we'd have no objection to that.
The unions say talks are going ahead federally to cut out any unnecessary work practice. The result from those meetings will flow through to the states. The union says it's not workers' conditions that are costing jobs, it's the state of the economy.
As a retired aviator, John Norgard says the Amelia Earhart mystery is especially tantalising, simply as a challenging navigation exercise. Over the years, he's become engrossed in the story. Using wartime maps similar to those used by the aviatrix, he's spent hours plotting possible flight paths. John flew for Malaysian airline systems in East Malaysia and is well aware of the hazards of tropical flying. John says the American claim puts Amelia Earhart close to where his own calculations wound up.
I just worked it all through, discarded what I knew that couldn't be true through what I know through flying, and I just kept what was good and put it all together.
While it hasn't been confirmed if the wreckage discovery is authentic, John at least is hoping that the mystery has been solved once and for all.
I thought it would never be solved. I thought the aeroplane was in the bottom of the sea and that was the end of it, you know. But I really do hope that they have made a find and that it's solved at last.
A framework for the revamping of Newcastle's central business and residential district is vital. In the past 20 years, Alderman Greg Hees says some 30,000 residents have moved out of the inner city area. Council believes it's time for a new strategy, and this involves three parts. A central area strategy devised by Council and targeting Hunter Street and surrounding residential suburbs. A commercial plan for Honeysuckle Goodyard, and a community-based Old Town plan to rejuvenate the city's East End. The central area strategy and Honeysuckle are up for endorsement by City Council tonight. The central area strategy aims at keeping the city centre the principal administrative, commercial and entertainment focus of the Newcastle region. It proposes to get people back into the inner city by utilising vacant shop tops for housing. The plan also involves the controversial scheme to move Newcastle Railway Terminus west to Civic Station.
There's, very strong differences of opinion in the Labor Party about that.
So is it going to prove a controversial point tonight?
I think so.
For Honeysuckle, endorsement effectively gives the green light to developing the concept master plan.
The Honeysuckle Advisory Board will take account of all the comments that have been made about their plan and they'll develop a business plan, which is a staging of what they do first, where the funds are going to come from.
Concerned the city's East End may be overlooked, a group of citizens, including Cynthia Hunter, got together and formulated a plan to develop the city's traditional heartland. Their plan looks to make Pacific Park the area's social gathering venue, implement traffic calming facilities and protecting the area's wealth of historic buildings and natural attractions.
I think Newcastle is a perfect example of the open air museum. So much of our history you see by walking around.
Tonight, Council will be asked to help promote the plan and eventually get it endorsed.
A grey day for Shane Dye. It was even bleaker. Lying in agony after classic favourite Burst went berserk. Track officials were quickly on the scene. Dye told them he heard a crack as he fell.
He doesn't complain. He's a bit of a stoic, actually. You can bet there's something wrong with him.
Meanwhile, Burst had bolted. She was later found cantering down nearby Glebe Road.
She just sort of headed for the gate. I thought if I could beat her to the gate, it might stop her getting out in the road, but she just sort of stopped there first.
Dye was taken to the John Hunter Hospital. He's resting comfortably. A fair crowd today despite the drizzle. Beauties battled the elements in the fashion stakes. In the betting ring, money was changing hands at a furious rate. After a delay, the main event, the Coca-Cola Classic. And with no favourite, Zodiac Miss had all the running. $15.11 and won the placings, the Quinella $3.10, the trifecta $31.90. For Mick Dittman, his third classic. Died just seconds after being thrown. The 23-year-old landed on his shoulder. He told ambulance officers he thought he heard something crack as he hit the ground. He spent last night undergoing tests in the John Hunter Hospital. Doctors have since confirmed there's nothing broken. Di was still in a lot of pain this morning and didn't want to be interviewed. However, his wife Carla told us that the fall will not damage his chances at the Golden Slipper. Di is chasing his 4th straight slipper win. He'll be treated by a specialist in Sydney and should be right for April the 11th. He's due to be discharged from hospital tonight. Anthony Griffiths, NBN News.
Newcastle City Council and Hunter Water have been at loggerheads over the proposal to dump sewage sludge down disused mines under Burwood Beach for almost a year. Now Council has adopted a motion put by Alderman Don Geddes to call in the lawyers to try and stop the proposal. Alderman Geddes has successfully moved that Council solicitors advise Hunter Water that an environmental impact statement is required, a special meeting open to the public be convened, a committee to continue discussions with Hunter Water be formed, and if the dumping does begin before an EIS is done, injunctive proceedings be put in place to stop the activity.
The EIS will spell out all the difficulties that I envisage will be wrong with this type of disposal, and I believe it might take 6 to 12 months before that's completed.
But if it does take a year for the EIS to be done, that could throw into turmoil Hunter Water's intentions to begin trials of sludge dumping in June.
What we'd have to do, of course, is get Council to take out a bank guarantee to cover the damages that we may entail as a result of being delayed. We want to clean the beaches around here as best as possible. So the more we delay bringing secondary treatment on, the longer the delay in getting our beaches second to none.
The state member for Newcastle, Bryce Gaudry, has also entered the sludge dumping debate. Mr Gaudry will introduce a bill to repeal a section of the Act governing Hunter Water. He says Section 61A removes the right of citizens to take action against the corporation for damages caused by sludge dumping. But Mr Broad believes Hunter Water enjoys no legal loopholes.
The point is, the first 18 months of the trial will go nowhere near properties. So the provisions in 62 will not apply.
"74-year-old pensioner Orb Baker lives for his sport, in particular rugby league. Over the last 4 decades, he's collected hundreds of thousands of facts and figures. Do you need to know who was sent off in the 1952 grand final? Who was the referee in the second round clash between the Dragons and the Eels in 72? How about Canterbury's points tally for 1968?
Canterbury had a bad season that year. They only scored 37 tries for the whole season, only 250 points.
But not just the Winfield Cup, Orb also has a detailed study of games through the Newcastle Premiership. He's spent thousands of hours beside his TV set and radio, putting the game into the history books.
Yeah, it's just something to do over the last 40 odd years.
Out in the next room watching one of the family's 4 TV sets, Audrey Baker. Audrey doesn't share her husband's passion for following sport.
We don't watch anything together, really. Because we got our own bedrooms, our own television, we got everything of our own. 2 legs.
Orb Baker's tip for the footy this year, Manly Warringah or St George. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
In 1989, the government commissioned the Joint Coal Board and a team of researchers from Newcastle University to look into 6 reported cases of brain cancer at Budgewoi New Vale No. 2. 3 of those cases were found to be genuine brain tumours. That meant of the 90 workers employed at the mine, 2% had brain cancer. The incidence was 5 times higher than that at neighbouring Munmora and New Vale No. 1. A study of working conditions and lifestyle revealed few differences between the mine workers. What did stand out, however, was the high amount of anti-greasing solvents used at New Vale No. 2.
We think that these brain tumours were work-related, that it was occurring in this mine, and that the excess use of solvents had something to do with it.
In 1985, the Joint Coal Board introduced a chemical control system to reduce and regulate the use of dangerous chemicals, specifically degreasing solvents used to clean machinery. Since then, solvent usage at New Vale No. 2 has fallen considerably, reducing the risk to workers. All 90 miners at New Vale have been given a clean bill of health, but according to Dr. Brown, the risk from past exposure is unknown.
It's possible that they have been at some risk. Fortunately, the use of solvents in this mine is no longer excessive compared to the other ones, and so if they're no longer being exposed to these high levels, it's probably like having given up smoking cigarettes.
Of the 3 men who developed brain tumours at the mine, 2 have died. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
Practising law and being the head of the organisation that plucks lives from the surf are oceans apart. But Newcastle solicitor Scott Derwin is making that jump, having been appointed the Chief Executive Officer of Surf Life Saving Australia. Mr. Derwin has never been far from the smell of sea spray and SLSA. He's been involved in the local organisation and he's been the chairman of the Hunters Rescue Helicopter Service Board during the most turbulent 8 months of its existence. The furor began when sacked employee John Skeen alleged an SLSA subsidiary had taken control of the assets of the Hunter Service and mortgaged the Angel One chopper. The issue ended up before the Attorney-General, who reached a settlement in January to ensure local control of the service. Despite the bitter debate, Mr. Derwin is confident the working relationship between the Hunter Service and the SLSA under his authority will be healthy.
It can still be a very a good and effective relationship. The exact terms of that relationship obviously have to be determined by the new board of the service, which comes into place in the next few weeks.
During the 8-month helicopter furor, those pushing for the service to be locally controlled have called for the resignation of Scott Derwin. In fact, Newcastle Alderman Don Geddes has said he wouldn't be satisfied until Mr. Derwin had gone.
I'm satisfied that he has resigned because I do believe that in the past that he has been responsible for what has happened. And he's certainly been quite negative in trying to resolve that particular situation.
My decision to resign in the next few weeks is certainly not motivated by the calls of the Geddes and the others of this world.
The helicopter service in this area can now build itself on its local involvement and its local funding and on its local operation, and I think that's extremely good.
Olympic Swimming Defence forced the breakers into error while pushing forward themselves, giving Mike Gibson plenty to think about in the early stages. On the rare occasions they did get free in the first half, the breakers applied some pressure, but it was easily mopped up by Olympic. In the 24th minute, former Austral guest player Robbie Ironside found himself in the right spot at the right time. And moments later, Abbotsard should have made it 2-0, just overdoing the good work, and Gibson saved the day. From that, the breakers nearly equalised, and it was a super run by Big Craig Moffat, slicing through the defence and unlucky not to get a full-blooded shot away. The second half openers the first, Tim Bredbury doing everything but find the back of the net. A well-rehearsed corner between Saab and Gary Phillips nearly paid dividends, except for a sensational save by Gibson. but inevitably it had to happen, and it was a blinder from Grant Lee. Craig Moffat was pinged for an apparent tackle on Bredbury, and the referee pointed to the spot. Bredbury made no mistake. Breakers Nick Meredith then pulled one back, an enormous shot from almost 40 metres. The Breakers had a couple of more chances before Sydney Olympic scored one of the best goals of the year. Ironside ran it on to Barrett, and he took on the defence. On to Saab, who took the ball close to the area, and his perfectly timed ball found Bredbury, and it was 4-1 to Olympic.
The Australian building industry is continually changing.
The building industry itself over the last 20 years has become increasingly more complex. Technology is in some areas overtaking the skills and the management skills of individuals.
Mr Varnum says to cope with this technology, advanced management skills are required. Through a $1 million grant from state government, the course curriculum was detailed and the external studies building erected. The 6-year part-time course is studied externally. All enrolled are employed in the building industry. The course is problem-based, presenting the students with workplace situations ranging from site construction to property development and design.
We have the student in a hypothetical working environment, and then we give them the necessary technical information in order for them to assimilate that and resolve their problem.
Mr Varnum believes the course is the only problem-based learning approach for building in the world. This year the course was limited to Australian enrolments. Overseas students could become a reality within the next few years.
Some needed a bit of meditation to get ready, but with the mind in action, it was time for the muscle. It was the Swansea Belmont Surf Lifesaving Club swim across Lake Macquarie, a 4-kilometre slog from Cole Point to Belmont. While some argued it would be easier to drive round, others went for surf skis and boards. Jamie Jenkins from Nobbies took out the swim in a time of 41 minutes. Megan Harper was the first woman home, just 1 minute behind.